Hi there, I'm Dr. Karen Agar, and this video looks at the basics of writing a class in Java. So together we're going to be writing a dog class. Remember, a class is like a template. So we want to list things up top that all dogs have in common. In my example, I've said that all dogs will have a name, breed, age, and weight. You can see their data types I've provided here. And then in the next section, we want to talk about all of the actions or things that the dogs can do. These are methods that we define down here. We'll be writing several methods together, but just to give you an example, in this diagram, we've said that all dogs should be able to bark. Remember that the idea of a class is different than the concept of an object. An object would be an instance of this class. So for example, I have a dog named Copper. He has a specific breed. He's a beagle. He's 10 years old, and let's say he weighs 50 pounds. You might have a dog with a different name, breed, age, and weight, but they should all have these similar attributes and all be able to do whatever methods or functions we give them. So here we are in Eclipse. I'm going to create a new class file, and again, I want to give this class the name dog. So here we've got a public class dog. Notice the open and closed curly braces here. We want to put everything relating to the dog class between these open and closed curly braces. So if we flip back to our diagram, all of this information, and again, we're going to define more methods, need to go inside these open and closed curly braces. So code for dog class here. It is convention to name your class starting with an uppercase letter. And also notice that I do not have a main method. Main methods are used for running programs. All we're doing is creating an outline or a template that other programs that might have main methods can call. They can invoke or call our methods that we have here. So let's start actually filling in the code for the dog class. So we saw that we had two different things. We listed the attributes, or also known as fields, of the class. And then I'm going to separate this with a line, just like we had in our diagram, and list the methods. You can think of those as actions that the dog class can do. So let's start with the fields. Again, we had a name, breed, age, and weight. Age being an int, weight being a double. I'm going to start by defining them the way that you're probably used to. String name, string breed, int for age, and double for weight. Notice that there is one difference though when defining these fields or attributes within a class. There's one extra step that we need to take, and that is to protect these variables. We will jump more into private versus public access modifiers later, but for now, get into a good habit of writing the word private before all of these variables. By making these fields private, we're restricting access so that these fields can only be updated, even accessed, only within this class, within these curly braces. So any methods I write below here, we can have access to these, but if a user had a different file, or even if you created a different file, you would not be able to directly access any of these variables. This is good to protect our information, and we'll study more of the concepts of why we need to do something like this later on. So now that we've defined this, let's jump and create a new file. So I'm going to create a new file. It's important for now that we put this file in the same folder as our dog class. So I'm just going to name this dog demo. Feel free to name it whatever you want. And I do want this class to have a main method, meaning that I do want to be able to run and execute this class. I'll select finish. And again, do make sure that they are neighboring files in the same folder so that we're able to use and test the dog class from within this other file. So the first thing I want to do, I want to create a dog object. Now at this point you probably know how to create a scanner object, and so this follows a very similar format. Just like with creating a new scanner object, we're going to use the name of our class, dog. We get to give it a name, call it my dog, equals new dog. Compare and contrast this to creating a new scanner object. I'll type it in the comments below. So if we compare these, we can see that we use the name of the class twice. So the name of the class, we get to give it a name, and then we say equals new with open and close parentheses. So let's generalize this to class name, object name equals new class name and parentheses. Now, your next question might be, well, we left these parentheses blank, but we put something in these parentheses. This part will come a little bit later on, whether or not we need to put something in the parentheses here. For now, anytime that you create an object, unless otherwise specified, you can assume that you'll be using open and close parentheses with nothing in here. So now that we've created an instance or an object of type dog, what I would like to do is start assigning values to the variables. So I want to give dog a name, an age, things like that. So let's say we want to give the dog the name Copper. Well, you may start by saying, I'm going to have a statement similar to this, name equals Copper. This actually doesn't work. In this file, you can see that we have nothing called name. So it doesn't know what name is. You may have seen in other places a syntax similar to this, my dog dot name. So accessing my dog, the object of this class, and then the name variable. See that we've spelled it correctly, but actually this still does not let me do this. And the reason is, if I hover over this, it says the field dog.name is not visible. Well, it's not visible because we made it private. Now, if you're coding along with me, do not follow along with this part, but if I delete the word private here and just leave string name and switch back to my file, you can see that the error goes away. This is what the word private does for us. It makes it so that these field names are invisible in other files. Again, this is a good thing for protection of your data, and we'll get more into that later on. So for now, we want to get into the habit of making these fields private. So again, we have an error here. So this is not going to be the way that we can set the name to Copper. With private fields, such as the name of a dog, sometimes we want users to be able to update or modify the name. So this is where some special types of methods come in. So we're going to talk a little bit about accessor methods versus mutator methods. A mutator method is a special method that allows an outside file, such as our demo file here, to mutate or change the given variable. So I want to make a mutator method for name. I'll write the code for it here, and then we'll discuss what the code is doing. So here's an example of a mutator method for our name variable. So there's a couple different things we need to talk about here. So first of all, we use the word private to say we don't want access to this variable outside of the class. Well, we do want access to methods. I want this file to be able to call the setName method that I write, so we're going to use the word public. So now we've got private and public that we can put in front of things. We'll get back to what this means in just a minute, but let's skip over to this. This is just the name of your method. I've given it the name setName, and this actually follows the proper convention for what a mutator method should be named. It should be the name of the variable with the word set in front of it. And you can see that we do need to use camel case, so the N should be capital. What you don't want to do is have setName or change name or mod name or anything like that. Though these would work fine in practice, you should get in the habit of following the convention. I'll delete these. So then the next part that we need to look at is this. At this point, we've seen that all methods end in an open and close parentheses. Whether you're calling methods or defining methods, you always see open and close parentheses. The question is, sometimes you have values between the parentheses and sometimes you don't. Just to give you an example, some methods that you might be familiar with calling are things like having a scanner object, let's say it's called scan, and using the method like scan.nextInt, right? Here I've called or invoked a method. You can see the open and close parentheses. Similarly, we've invoked methods like system.out.println and said hello. In this case, we called a method named println, and you can see that we did have to put something between those parentheses. Deciding on whether or not your method needs something in the parentheses means we need to understand the idea of an argument. Anytime we need to get information inside of the class, we need a way or an opening that allows some information from an outside class, such as our demo class here, to get into this class. The only openings or ways to pass information into our dog class or any other class are through the use of arguments, which is passing through the parentheses. So what I've said here is that I have a method. It's available for use in outside files. They're going to use it with .setName, and I'm expecting them, the user, the other file, another programmer, when this method is called, to give me a string. So it's important you need to specify the data type. If you're expecting them to hand you a string, an int, a double, you need to specify that here. Then you can just give your string a name. In this case, I've just given it the name in. So this is like a temporary placeholder to hold some value that gets passed in. Let's look at how this might work, and then we'll think through what the actual code inside of this method does. So here was the incorrect way to try to set my dog's name to Copper. What I would like to do is invoke or call the method. Again, we've invoked methods before. The syntax for invoking or calling methods is always the object name. So if my scanner object was named scan, that would be the name used here. And then a dot, and then the name of the method. So the method name. You do have to end with an open and close parentheses, and there may or may not be something between those. So this is our syntax that we will always follow for invoking methods. In this case, my object name is what? It's got to be of type dog in order to use the dog methods. So I've given it the name my dog. So I'm going to start by saying my dog, then a dot. You can see Eclipse tries to give me the options of my methods, but I'm going to get in the habit of writing it out, and I want to set the name. Again, you can see that Eclipse is kind of giving us hints for what this method is that we define. We don't have to flip back to our file. It says we're expecting you to put a string in the parentheses. So inside here, because it accepts a string, I need to enclose my name in quotes. Note that I also could have done something like string in equals copper, and then passed in the variable name here. So that's synonymous. So now that we've invoked the method in this file, we'll flip back to our dog class and see what that would do. So we've called the setName method, and we've passed it the argument copper. So what actually happens behind the scene is this is like executing the line string in equals copper. It takes the value that the user handed into this method and it sets it equal to string in, right? So at this point, once this method has been called, in has the value of copper stored in its memory. So what we ultimately wanted to do with this is allow the user to pass in a name that our name variable will receive the value of. So what we do is this passes in string in equals copper. So then if we assign that same value, remember in holds the value of copper, to our name variable, name has now been updated to the value copper. So now that we've looked at getting information in and being able to mutate our variables, let's look at accessing our variables. We'll look at accessing this same variable, name, Just like we used the word setName to mutate, this time we want to access, we want to allow them to just see the variable instead of mutate or change it. So we're going to use getName. I'll write the code and then we'll explain. All right, so here's our code for our accessor method for name. Again, I followed a naming convention. Instead of set, now I'm going to allow a user to get the name. Notice that if I'm in this file and I just say, hey, get me the name, there's no information I need to pass in to the Java class. So with this kind of method, an accessor method, we don't need information from the class that is using our methods. Because we don't need any information, we get to leave the open and close parentheses, this kind of opening into our class, blank. We don't need any information. However, we want to hand them information back. So I want to get the value of our name variable. Right now, it would be copper for my dog. I want to get this value out and back to any class that calls the method. So we're going to return the value of name, and that's exactly what this line of code does. Now, because we're going to return name, and name is a string, we put the word string right here. So what this line tells us is that we can use this method outside of this class. This method will return something of type string, and this method can be invoked or called using .getName, and no arguments are needed. Then we return name, which is a string, so this matches up. Hopefully you can see that if you were to write an accessor and a mutator method for a different variable like age, we would be returning not a string but an int here, right? And similarly, if we were to set age, we would be accepting not a string but an int. So before we move on to writing the other accessor and mutator methods, let's look back at our dog class. Now that we've set the name, let's try to invoke or call the getName method. Again, follow our format here, which is object name dot method name, and then with parentheses. So my dog dot, we named the method getName, and we don't have to provide it any information. So again, when this line is invoked, my dog.getName, this line of code executes. So we're going to return the value of name, which puts the value, in this example, copper, right here in the code. This is super similar to using scanner's next methods. If you've used scanner.nextInt before, what happens is it grabs an int and it actually puts it right here in your code so that you can do things with an int that you would normally do with an int. So in this case, it's putting a string right here. The string's value is copper. So I can do something like string s equals my dog.getName. This assigns the value copper to string s. Or I could do something like system.out.println my dog.getName. Always like to save and run my files, so I'm going to save both files here. Notice what just happened. It gave me an error all of a sudden, and it says it can't find setName and getName. You may see this happen to you at home. The issue is if you see this tiny little asterisk up here, it means that I never saved this file. So as soon as I save this file and these changes have been committed to my hard drive, if I flip back over here, now it knows setName and getName exist. So I'm actually glad that happened in the video so that you can see that might happen again at home. I'm going to get rid of all of this extra stuff. I'm going to leave how to invoke a method and how to define objects. That's kind of good information to have up here. And then I haven't changed any of my code. I create a new dog object, mydog.setName to copper, and then system.out.println, mydog.getName should retrieve the value copper, put it right here, and then print it out. So if I run this, you can see that it's going to print out copper. So now take a few minutes I would pause the video if I were you and see if you can write the accessor and mutator methods for the other 3 variables. When you come back, I'll have it filled in. All right, so at this point, I have not only my accessor and mutator methods for name, so set and get name, but I also have set breed, accepting a string since breed is a string, and then setting that string to our breed variable, assigning that value to our breed variable. Get breed, returning breed there, which is a string. Get age, so because the user will be getting the age, we're going to return to them an int, our age variable. Set the age, we need to accept an int from them and then assign that value to age. Get weight, very similar. Notice that I'm keeping the same naming convention for all of these. Weight is a double, so we'll return a double, our weight variable here. And then set weight, we need to accept a double from them. We can assign that value to weight, and we don't need to return anything. So now let's circle back to this word void. Notice that anytime I did not have a return statement, so return weight was a double, return age was an int, return breed was a string, right? Anytime I didn't need to get information from this file back to them, so set name, we didn't have to give them any information right here. Compare that to how get name put the value of copper here, right? So we didn't return anything back to the file where the method was called. So we write void. That means we're not returning anything to them. So now we know what all of these different words mean. I trust that in your demo file, you can set and get your different variables, test them, make sure that they work. I do want to show you one more thing. Accessors and mutators are very common, and it's a necessity to know the correct way to write these. But these are not the only methods that you can write. So just to demonstrate one more method, I'm going to write another method that's fun, that doesn't follow these strict conventions. So we're going to have a method named bark. And this is just something I made up. There's nothing special about the name bark. What I want is when the bark method is called, I want to just print out to the console, so to print down here, woof, like a dog barking. So I do not need any input from the calling file. They're just going to call the bark method. So if I don't need input, we know that our parentheses do not need anything in them, right? And I also don't need to return anything to get any information from here out to this file. So I also know that my return type should be void. We know we want to use it in another file, so we also know it's going to be public. The order of these words do matter. So again, public void, and give it a name. I'll call it bark. We don't need any input. And so in my method, we've said that we actually just want to print to the console woof. So just as if you were in your main method, we would type system.out.println woof. Save it. And just to show you invoking it, because we named it bark, if I come to this file, as my very last line, I say my dog.bark. Again, we do have to invoke it with an object of type dog since that's where the method is defined. Then if we run this file, we save it, we should still set the name to copper and then print out copper. And then we should see woof executed here. If I run this, we see woof. So this is like having this line of code, if I just copy and paste this, execute right here. Now a couple other things I want to note. We know that main methods are the methods that are run by Java, so these lines execute one at a time, top to bottom. It's a little bit different if we look at our dog class because these methods like set and get breed, nothing has executed, right? So because none of these are in a main method, this class does not run. I don't follow the flow of control executing one line at a time like I do in my main method. The only time any code from dog.java is executed is when the methods are invoked here. So we created a dog object and then we called set name. So it doesn't matter if this was listed as the first method in this file or if I cut it and put it down at the bottom of the file, as long as it's still within the class, it doesn't matter what order it's in. It goes, it finds a method called setName and executes only the code right here within the setName method. Our flow of control jumps back here, calls system.out.println. Before it can actually print and finish printing things, we call mydog.getName. So it looks through, is there a method named getName? Found one, right? Return name, it returns here, and then it prints out copper. Same thing with bark. It skips all the other methods, looking for one named bark, and then does whatever is enclosed in the bark method. So this has been an example of writing a basic class. To review, you should really feel comfortable with calling methods, so being able to know how to call them, the object name dot method name, when to put something in parentheses, given that you see the method definition in another file. You should also now be comfortable with writing accessor and mutator methods. So you should really understand the ideas of return types and arguments, right? When to have both. You should know the naming conventions for accessor and mutator methods. And you should realize that we're not limited to just these methods. We can have any number of methods. So to kind of go back to our dog class, we had these 4 attributes. We did write a bark method, and we also wrote several other methods: setName, getName, setAge, getAge, and so on. So methods don't have to be tangible actions. They can be a more abstract function that the class has. And that is it for this time. Happy coding!